Hey GenderqueerChat, very late this week, my apologies, but it's actually a good thing for me because I got to watch Andrea's video first before making this one this week, and watching Andrea's video it was a really great video, and it actually gave me the confidence to talk about what I want to talk about today. So the topic this week is how does your gender relate to your sexuality? And this is a pretty important topic for me because it's something that, while going through my gender journey, I guess, the concepts for me of my gender identity, my own personal internal sense of my gender, and my relationships with other people, my attractions, how I perceive myself and how I wish to be perceived, my sexuality, became very tangled up and interrelated and became very hard to separate. And for me that was probably the basis, the largest part of the troubles that I faced while trying to come to terms with my gender. So yeah, if I had have seen a video like the one Andrea made, or like the one that hopefully I will make, when I was first exploring my gender identity and looking on places like YouTube for some guidance and ideas, or for other people that were like me, that would have been really helpful. But in reality, the general narrative and consensus is that gender identity and sexuality are two very distinctly separate entities, and it's generally not talked a hell of a lot about how they can interconnect and overlap and merge into each other, or collide in my case. It did. So yeah, so thanks to Andrea for making the video first, and yeah, hopefully I will be able to get across what I want to say in this video, because it's something that is very important to me, and something I've kind of not avoided but alluded to and maybe sidestepped a little bit in previous videos. So, as I've mentioned before, for me, the kind of trigger for me to really explore my gender in a deeper, more organised way was the way that I felt in my relationships, intimate relationships, emotional relationships, physical relationships with other people. I don't think, if I had had no interaction with other people in that kind of sense, I'm not talking about just friends or family or anything like that, or general society, but if I hadn't been experiencing more intimate, intense relationships where I guess my gender, or the way that I express myself in a way that people would come to think was a gendered way of expressing myself, I don't think I would have necessarily have actively thought about my gender identity and felt the drive or the need to deconstruct it, pull it apart, put it back together in the way that I had. As I've said before, I don't experience a lot of physical dysphoria. It's mainly social dysphoria, but once again it is more apparent and more obvious and pronounced. I just use three words that all kind of mean the same thing. I do that a lot, I find, but yeah, it was more a big deal in intimate, physical, emotional relationships. And so that's what made me first start to question my gender and actively try and tackle it. So coming from that situation already, my idea of myself in regards to my sexuality, or what I was attracted to, or how I presented myself in relationships, or how I wished to be perceived, was already well tangled into my concept of gender. So then I questioned gender and pulled that apart and smashed through that binary, the social conditioning and the construction of everything that I knew about gender, and everything unravelled really quickly, as it tends to do, and I found myself in a bit of gender freefall, questioning and confused, and also liberating but quite scary. But sexuality came along for the ride, so I found that without that heteronormative male-female binary social structure in place, my idea, my perceptions and the way that I'd been taught to think about sexuality were no longer valid and became unhinged, and gender and sexuality went all messed up and made me very confused little genderqueer. And I struggled with it for a very long time. Now, the ironic thing was my attractions themselves hadn't particularly changed. Through coming out as genderqueer and exploring my gender and coming to understand myself better and coming to understand how I view gender differently, I guess my sexuality has also followed suit. I'm a lot less rigid in my attractions. I'm still attracted to kind of a few select kind of attributes that people have. I no longer necessarily think of them in a gendered way, so we're talking about personality traits or ways that people express themselves or attitudes and also physical characteristics. So I'm still primarily attracted to the same things that I was attracted to, but the way that I view those things now are in a less gendered way, and that's freed me up to be potentially attracted to a broader cross-section or more of a variety of different people across traditional and non-traditional gender spectrums. I think my sexuality has become more fluid. I think I allow myself now to be more accepting of different things and therefore allow myself to be attracted or to have interests or develop crushes on people who I may not have allowed myself or thought was possible to think of in that way previously when I was stuck in my old gendered mindset. So that's how it's changed. How I actually perceive myself though, and this is probably the more important thing for me, it's actually how I perceive myself in relationships and how I would expect or how I would wish people to perceive me and see me in intimate relationships or physical relationships. So in one sense I don't really have a sexual identity. It is tied in very closely to my gender, but I can't rely on kind of ideas of being straight or gay or whatever. I've used the term lesbian for myself over the last few years to try and describe my view of my own sexuality, but I've also come to realise that that's an incomplete term, and it's not so much that I believe that I am a lesbian, and I do say it to people a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm serious, but I'm also tongue-in-cheek, and the reason for that is that when everything did come all unhinged and all convoluted, I desperately looked around in regards to gender and sexuality and both together, because really I'm finding it hard to separate them at all. I was looking around trying to find other people who were like me, who expressed their gender in similar ways to how I express my gender. And I didn't see much similarities with the kind of conventional groups of people until I sort of stepped into queer world. And then I felt a real kinship and connection and attraction to the community of people who were identified as lesbian. Somehow that seemed right to me. I could understand it. I could witness how people were within relationships, how they interacted, how they expressed their gender, and how they expressed their attractions. And for me, that felt like a really good fit. So yeah, I've labelled myself as lesbian, and that's more or less indicative of the kind of person that I'm usually attracted to. And of course, I'm doing that in a whole stereotyping kind of way anyway, because not all lesbians are the same. But I guess for me it was a convenient way of labelling myself and labelling my attractions so that I could understand it, because I wasn't understanding it and everything was really confusing and, as I said before, just free-falling out of control, and I needed something to latch onto. So lesbian it was. Now, in a video that we talked about bisexuality probably 6 months ago or something, I hadn't thought about this before, but I randomly said some deranged quote at the end of statement at the end of my video, which was my lesbian has become my gender identity and genderqueer has become my sexual identity or sexuality. And it seemed pretty silly at the time, but something when I said that clicked, and I realised that that was true. I'd taken on this mantle of lesbian and I kind of adopted it for myself, because that's how I perceived myself in relationships. It's how I wanted to be seen in relationships. When I imagine myself in a relationship, or when I imagine myself being intimate with someone or sharing emotional intimacy, I guess the impression of myself is someone who is more similar to that particular group of people who I was referring to. But I understand that I'm not a lesbian, but it is a convenient term that I've used that has actually become more about my gender, the way I express myself, the way I see myself, if that makes sense. So in that way, I guess sexuality and gender identity were really confused and tangled up for me, and even though I feel a hell of a lot better about it now, they're still really interconnected. And genderqueer has become my sexuality because I know I don't have any other useful terms to express my sexuality. No other terms really seem to fit or feel right. And for me, it is more about who I am and how I feel and how I interact and how I wish to interact with other people. And that, I guess, coming from that place in intimate relationships and in physical relationships which inform my gender identity, now my gender identity is informing my sexuality. So while genderqueer is not a term to be used for sexuality, for me, I'm personally using it and taking it on as to describe both my gender identity and that facet of my gender identity as it relates to intimate relationships with other people. So yeah, it was a crazy kind of statement that I made at the end of a video, kind of haphazardly without thinking about it, but it's actually stuck true and has developed, I guess, in my mind, and that's what I wanted to say. So yeah, really interesting topic, and I do believe I have rambled on quite a bit there, and it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. I hold the right to declare that anything or everything in this video that I've said is complete rubbish, and I'll let you know if I retract any statements or vast portions of this video, but for the moment that's how I feel about my sexuality and how I feel about my gender. And yeah, it's a pretty good place, and yeah, cool. Really interested to see what everyone else has to say, and thanks to Andrea for going first, and see you next week.